Hi, welcome to our Global Climate Action Report 2022 Q&A session. This report and Q&A session are released by the Data-Driven EnviroLab. DDL is an interdisciplinary collaboration of policy experts, data scientists, visual designers, and interactive programmers using cutting-edge data and analytics to create solutions to the world's environmental problems. The group was founded and is led by Dr. Angel Xu and is based at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. Today, I will be interviewing research and data scientist at DDL, Zhi Yi Yeo, about the objective, methods, and findings of the Global Climate Action Report. So my first question today is, what is the central objective of the Global Climate Action Report?
Yeah, so I think for the Global Climate Action Report, what we are really trying to understand is who and how non-state actors, including cities, regions, and companies, are contributing to the global climate action landscape. So we know for a fact that these non-state actors are integral to limiting global warming to well below 2 degrees or even 1.5 degrees Celsius, which is the global goal that's codified in the 2015 Paris Agreement, and that which will help avoid the worst effects of climate change. But we still trying to understand, who's making commitments and how are these non-state actors contributing to the landscape of global climate action. So that's kind of the central objective of the Global Climate Action Report. And on top of that, for this year, we also took a closer look at the ambition level that these non-state actors are pledging to, and also what kind of progress they're making towards these commitments that they have pledged.
And how does this report relate to the initiatives report released simultaneously?
Yep. So I think in terms of climate mitigation action by non-state actors, we generally see action in two kind of broad categories. So the first one would be through individual actions and pledges made by these non-state actors. So individual cities or companies pledging some form of emissions reductions commitments. Whereas on the other hand, for the other category, we also see non-state actors kind of coming together and coalescing to take action through what we call international cooperative initiatives. So these two reports complement each other in a sense that, the one part of it looks at the individual non-state actors' commitments, whereas the other report looks into actions by individual cooperative initiatives. And both reports, look at the respective progress that's being made towards these different commitments.
Yeah, that's really great. So in the actors report, how many actors and what types of actors does your report cover?
Yeah, so the actors report covers both subnational governments that include cities and regions, but also companies across 13 major economies. So in terms of the number of reports that we have covered, we are looking at over 2.4 thousand cities, over 120 regions, and over 1,000 companies. And these are just the actors that have made some form of commitments. And of course, with different amounts of data reported and with different types of information that we've gathered on these different actors, the different sections, including the ambition and progress section, would include a slightly different number of actors.
Yeah, that's great. So just a quick clarification question there. Are the actors only actors who self-report their emissions, or does the report also cover actors who don't self-report emissions?
Yeah, so for this report, the data that we've used mostly covered actors that have self-reported these emissions, either through kind of reporting platforms like CDP, or they report through some form of initiative like the Global Covenant of Mayors.
Great, yeah. So how does this newly released report and the initiatives report relate to other work being done at DDL?
That's a great question. So I think on one hand, it kind of shows the data-driven approach to research that DDL takes, across all facets of our research. So for the individual action report, for example, we had to collect data from several data sources, and we had to, clean the data and harmonize them so that we can actually analyze the data and understand kind of trends at a more macro and global level instead of, looking at individual actors or individual cities, which is valuable, but doesn't necessarily paint a broad picture across the globe. On the other hand, I think in terms of the research topic, it's also really connected and linked to some of the other research that we are doing at DDL. So for example, we know that cities are, big sources of greenhouse gas emissions because of their density and population. But cities will also be the ones that will feel the impact of climate change. And one example of that is from increasing heat. So, the combination of the urban heat island effect and climate change is going to exacerbate, heat impacts on city areas and urban areas. So while, the Global Climate Action Report looks at, climate mitigation actions that are taken by non-state actors such as cities, other areas that are connected and other areas that DDL is looking at includes topics like urban heat through the UESI project, and more importantly, looking at the intersection of environmental impacts and social equity. So these are very interconnected and linked topics that we are working on across the lab.
Definitely. So, as far as this report specifically, what are the main takeaways from the report? And are there any causes for optimism or findings that could substantially reduce emissions if implemented moving forward?
So I think from from our report, while some of the overall findings are a little bit bleak, there is some room for cautious optimism. So on one hand, we see a lot of subnational governments, including cities and regions, having targets that are not ambitious enough necessarily to achieve the Paris Agreement goals of keeping warming to 2 degrees or 1.5 degrees Celsius. And on the progress side, a lot of the more than half of subnational governments are also not making sufficient progress towards the targets they have set. In terms of target setting, we see a lot of momentum towards a target. We see a lot of momentum previously where subnational governments had set targets for 2020. Some of that momentum has not really carried forward to more midterm and long-term targets. So we see an overall decrease in the number of targets being set, even though in the past 2 years from 2021 and this year, we do see an increase in targets being set. So we lost some momentum, but it's regaining is what we see. And on the company side, there is room for more cautious optimism. So we see that, more than 75% of companies are on track to meet their self-reported targets. And when we compare the data that was collected in 2018 and from 2021, we do see that overall ambition by companies have increased. So the targets that they have set can lead to greater emissions reductions than previously reported in 2018. One caveat there, of course, is that, for companies, we definitely still need to look at whether these companies plan to use offsets to meet these emissions reductions targets, and whether, the targets actually cover scope 3 emissions as well, because, we know that scope 3 emissions form the majority of emissions for many companies across different sectors. So we haven't really deep dive into whether scope 3 emissions are included in these targets, but that's definitely high on our research agenda. And that's kind of a caveat that, there's room for cautious optimism.
So, one more question. Will there be future iterations to this report that will answer questions like that?
Yeah, so I think definitely, for this year, what we have really focused on is looking at progress and ambition. And I think in the future, that's definitely a direction that we want to look into, and we want to continue the research and incorporate some of these caveats and considerations that we've mentioned. So I think in the past, some of our research focused a little bit more on landscape and, emissions reduction potential. But as we approach critical milestones, 2030, 2050, and the window for action closes, we really need to focus on not just who has made commitments, but being able to hold actors accountable for some of these commitments that that they have made, and that includes looking at things like whether they plan to use offsets to achieve these targets and etc.
Great. And so, as far as the findings from this report right now, who is this report able to inform ideally?
I think ideally we've definitely tried to make the report as accessible as possible to both the research community, but also to policymakers looking at global climate governance. I think beyond that, anybody who's interested in this topic, should also be able to pick up the report and have a better understanding of what is the picture of non-state actions and kind of like what's needed next, for us to actually achieve some of the global climate goals that we have set out for ourselves.
Great. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to do this Q&A. It's given us a lot of valuable information about the Global Climate Action Report.
Awesome. Thank you so much too.
Thank you.